Our channel aims to shed light on the invaluable lessons and guidance imparted by Imam Ali, covering a wide range of topics including spirituality, leadership, justice, morality, and philosophy. Through detailed explanations, reflections, and insightful interpretations, we bring Imam Ali's saint's words to life, helping you connect with his divine wisdom in today's world. Whether you're seeking spiritual growth, intellectual enlightenment, or simply a deeper understanding of the teachings of one of history's most influential leaders, this channel is for you. Join us as we embark on a journey of knowledge and inspiration straight from the sacred texts of Najh al-Balagha. Subscribe to stay updated with weekly content, including sermons, letters, and sayings of Imam Ali, along with their meanings and practical applications in our lives. Zuhd and altruism. One of the ingredients of Zuhd is altruism. Ithar, altruism, and athara, igazam are derived from the same root. Athara means giving precedence to one's interests over those of others. In other words, it implies monopolizing everything for oneself and depriving others. But either means preferring others over oneself and bearing hardship for the comfort and good of others. The Zahid, by virtue of his simple, humble, and content living, is hard upon himself so that others may live in ease. He sacrifices for the sake of the needy, because with his sensitive heart, which feels the pains of others, he can relish the world's bounties only when there does not exist a single man oppressed by need. He derives greater satisfaction by feeding and clothing others and working for their ease than he did those things for himself. He endures deprivation, hunger, and pain so that others may be well fed and live without hardships. Ithar represents the most majestic and sublime manifestation of human greatness, and only very great human beings climb to its noble heights. The Holy Quran refers to the episode of the self-sacrifice of Ali and his honored family in the glorious verses of Surat Halata. Ali the Fatima Machu and their sons once gave away whatever they had, which was no more than a few loaves of bread, to the poor for the sake of Allah and despite their own distress. That is why this story circulated among the angels, and a verse of the Holy Quran was revealed in the praise of their act. Once when the holy prophets came to visit Hadrat al-Zahra, observing that his daughter had put on a silver bracelet and hung a new curtain on the door, signs of unease appeared upon his face. Zarat was quick to discern the cause of her father's reaction. When the Prophet left, without losing time, she took out her bracelet and, removing the curtain from the door, sent them to be carried to the Prophet, so that he might give them to the needy. When al-Zahra's messenger 100 brought them to the Prophet, he looked at them with amazement. He was glad that his daughter had taken the hint and foregone her simplest luxuries for the benefit of others. The neighbors first was the maxim in the household of Ali and Fatima 93 in Qutbah 193, which describes the qualities of the pious. Ali says the following: "The man of Bamu Takwan subjects his own self to hardships so that the people may live in comfort." The Holy Quran describes the Ansar helpers, who in spite of their poverty welcomed the Muhajirun and the emigrants as their own brethren, giving them preference over their own selves. In these words, they love whosoever has migrated to them, not finding in their breasts any need for what they have been given, and prefer others above themselves, even though poverty be their lot. 59. 90. Obviously, the altruistic ingredient of such comes into play only under certain conditions. In an affluent society, altruism is less frequently required, but in conditions where poverty and deprivation are prevalent, as in the society of all Medina during the Prophet's time, its need is greater. This is one of the secrets of the apparent difference of the lifestyles of Ali and the Holy Prophet with the rest of the Imams. In any case, Zuhd, with its underlying altruistic motives, has nothing in common with monasticism and escape from society. Instead, it is a product of man's gregarious instincts and a manifestation of his noblest feelings, which reinforce the social bonds between fellow human beings. Sympathy and kindness, the sympathy, and the willingness to share the suffering of the needy and the deprived is another ingredient of Zuhd. When the destitute witness the luxuries and comforts of the richer classes, their anguish is multiplied. To the hardships of poverty and destitution is added the stinging feeling of deprivation and backwardness in relation to others. Man, by nature, cannot tolerate to remain a silent spectator while others, who have no merit over him, eat, drink, enjoy, and relish freely at the cost of his deprivation. When society is divided into haves and have-nots, the man of Allah considers himself responsible. In the first place, as Amir al-Mu'minin says, he should strive to change the situation which permits the gluttony of the rich oppressor and the hunger of the oppressed in accordance with the covenant of Allah with the learned men of the Ummah. In the second place, he strives to ameliorate the state of affairs through altruism and self-sacrifice by sharing whatever he possesses with the needy and the deprived. But when he sees the situation deteriorating beyond reparation, and it is practically impossible to alleviate the misery of the poor through sympathy, he practically shares their deprivation and tries to soothe their wounded hearts by adopting a lifestyle similar to that of the poor. Sympathy with others and sharing their suffering is of essential importance, especially in the case of the leaders of the Ummah on whom all eyes are fixed. Ali, more than at any other time, lived a severely ascetic life during the days of his caliphate. He used to say, "Indeed, Allah has made it obligatory for just leaders that they should maintain themselves at the level of the poor class, so that they do not despair of their distress. Should I be content with being called Amir al-Mu'minin while refusing to share the adversities of the times with the people? Or should I be an example of them in the distress of life?" In the same letters to Uthman ibn Hunayf, he says the following: "It is absolutely out of question that my desire should overpower me, and my greed should lead me to relish the choicest foods, while in Hijaz and Yamama there may be some people who despair of even a single loaf of bread and who do not get a full meal. Shall I lie with a satiated belly, while around me are those whose stomachs are hungry and whose livers are burning at the same time?" Ali would reproach anyone else for practicing the same kind of asceticism in life. When faced with their objection as to why himself practiced it, he would reply, "I am not like you. The leaders have a different duty." This approach of Ali Tan can be observed in the conversation with Asim in Zayed al-Harith 770 in volume 9 of Bihar al-Anwar. It has been related from al-Kafi that Amir al-Mu'minin said, "Allah has appointed me as the leader of the people and made it my duty to adopt a way of living in food and clothing on par with the poorest classes of the society, so that, on the one hand, it may soothe the distress of the poor, and on the other, restrain the rich from rebellioning." An incident is related from the life of the great Faqih Wahid Behbahani. May Allah be pleased with him. One day he observed one of his daughters-in-law wearing a garment made of a fabric usually worn by women of rich families of those days. He reproached his son, the late Aka Muhammad Ismail, the lady's husband, in that regard. The son recited this verse of the Holy Quran in reply to his father's remarks, saying, "Who has forbidden the ornament of Allah which he has brought forth for his servants, and the good things of his providing?" The father said, "I don't say that putting on good dresses, eating good food, and making use of Allah's bounties is forbidden. Not at all. Such restrictions do not exist in Islam. However, there is one thing to be remembered. We are a family charged with the duty of the religious leadership of Muslims and have special responsibilities. When the people of poor families see the rich live luxuriously, their frustration is aggravated. Their only consolation is that at least the Akos family lives like they do. Now if we too adopt the lifestyles of the rich, that will deprive them of their only consolation. However, we cannot practically change the present social condition, but let us not grudge at least this much of sympathy. As can be clearly seen, Zuhd, which derives motivation from sympathy and readiness to share the sufferings of others, has nothing in common with monastic asceticism. It is not based on escapism from the society. The Islamic concept of Zuhd is a means of alleviating the sufferings of the society. Zuhd and freedom. Another ingredient of Zuhd is love of freedom and independence. The union between Zuhd and freedom is as primordial as it is indissoluble. Bihar al-Anwar Tabriz Vol. 9, p. 758. The dictates of need and exigency are the criteria of opportunists, whereas independence from want is characteristic of free men. The deepest aspiration of the free men unattached to the world is non-encumbrance, buoyancy, absence of hindrance, and freedom of movement. As a result, they adopt Zuhd and contentment so as to reduce their wants to a minimum, thus liberating themselves from the bondage of need for things and persons. The life of a human being, like that of any other mere rational animal, requires a series of natural and indispensable necessities like air, shelter, food, water, and clothing. Man cannot free himself entirely from attachment to such needs and other things such as light and heat, so as to make himself, in philosophical terminology, self-sustaining, muktafi bid'atik. However, there are a series of other wants which are not necessary and natural but are imposed upon one in the course of one's life, either by oneself or by social and historical factors beyond his control, which nevertheless set limits upon his freedom. Such constraints are not very dangerous as long as they are not transformed into inner needs. such as certain political constraints and compulsions. The most dangerous of compulsions are those which emerge as inner needs from within one's own self to shackle him. The mechanism of these needs, which lead to inner weakness, impotence and defeat, operates in such a way that when one turns to luxuries and comforts in order to add charm, delight and glamour to one's life so as to feel more secure and strong in order to derive a greater gratification from life, one is impelled to possess more and more things. In the course of time, one gets gradually accustomed to and engrossed in the means of comfort, luxury and power. These habits gradually result in a deeper attachment to and love for those things, and he is bound to them with invisible bonds, thus becoming helpless and impotent in front of them. That is, the same thing which had once added charm and delight to his life later deprives his personality of its vigor. And the same thing which once made him feel powerful against nature now turns him into a helpless slave without a will of his own. Man's inclination towards Zuhd is rooted in his love of freedom. By nature he is disposed toward possession of things and their exploitation. But when he realizes that the things, to the very extent they make him outwardly powerful and successful, inwardly transform him into a weakling without a willpower and a slave, he rebels against this slavery. This rebellion of man is what we call Zuhd. Our poets and sages have spoken a lot about freedom and liberation. Hafiz calls himself the slave of the magnanimity of the one who is free of everything under the blue sky that carries any taint of attachment. Among the trees, he admires the cypress which to him seems free of all wars. What those great men meant by freedom is freedom from attachment, freedom from being possessed, bewitched, and captivated by anything. But freedom implies something greater than being devoid of attachments. The ties which make a man weak, helpless, dependent, and impotent are not only those which originate in the heart or emotional attachments. To these must be added the various bodily, physical and psychological conditioning and artificial appendages that are first acquired for adding charm and glory to life and for the satisfaction of the lust for power and dominance, later growing into a form of addiction or rather becoming a second nature. These, while they may not involve one's emotional attachments or may even be regarded by one as reprehensible, should be counted as even stronger means of human servitude. They may bring an even greater degradation than emotional attachments do. Take the example of an enlightened Arif with a heart free of worldly attachments. For him, an addiction to tea, tobacco or opium has become a second nature. For him, abstention from foods to which he is accustomed may endanger his life. Can such a man lead a carefree life? Liberty from attachments is a necessary condition of freedom, but it is not sufficient in itself. Getting used to a minimum amount of the niceties of life and abstention from affluent living is another condition of freedom. The first thing to strike Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, one of the honored companions, when describing the station of the Holy Prophets, is the following: the Prophet of Allah, minimum necessities of life, was able to manage with thee. Is it a merit to be able to do with a minimum amount of means? If we take only the economic aspect into view, we should say that the Prophet's level of consumption was quite low. In this respect, therefore, the answer would be no, not at all. It is not a significant merit. But if viewed from a spiritual viewpoint, that is, when examined according to the criterion of one being free from the worldly bondage, we have to admit that it is a great merit indeed, because it is only by acquisition of this merit that a human being can live with any measure of unfettered freedom and unimpeded mobility and participate in the incessant struggle of life with agility and vigor. This matter is not restricted to habits involving the individual, binding one's self to social habits and customs, to modes and manners of dealing with people, the mesh of social connections and gatherings, adherence to styles and fashions in dress and demeanor. These and the like encumber life and deprive it of dynamism. Freedom of movement in the arena of life is like swimming. The lesser the interference and encumbrance for the swimmer, the greater is his ability to move around in the water. Too many attachments will not only deprive him of his mobility, but bring him closer to the danger of drowning. Arthur al-Din Aksikati says the following: to cross the river of life, shed your robes. Nakedness is a condition of keeping afloat. Farooqi Yazdi says the following: of nakedness the sage does not complain. A sword of good steel would not rust without a sheath. Baba Tahir has a rubai which, though intended for some other purpose, is nevertheless relevant here, O heart. Thy path is better when covered with thorns. Your track is better when stretched on heaven's high nay. If thou can strip the skin off thine flesh, do it, for the lighter thy burden the better it be. Sadi too relates a relevant fable in chapter 7 of his Gulistan, although it also aims at some other purpose. I saw a rich man's son squatting by the side of his father's grave and bragging thus before the son of a Darwish song, "My father's tomb is constructed of rare stones. Inside, it is paved with marble with inlaid turquoise. And look at your father's!" An unbaked brick or two were fetched on which a handful of earth was thrown. The sage's son heard these remarks and replied, "Yet before your father is able to budge under the pile of those stones, my father would have already reached paradise." These are allegories underlining the significance of lightness and freedom from bondage, the essential condition for dynamism, nobility and nimbleness. Leaps, movements and struggles were achieved by individuals who were practically freer of bondage and attachments, that is, in some sense they were Zahids. Gandhi, with his ascetic mode of life, brought the British imperialism to its knees. In the words of Yaqub Layth al-Safar, Gandhi did not set aside his diet of bread and onions till he became a terror for the Caliph. In our own times, the Viet Cong fighters were such an example. Their surprising power of resistance was drawn from what in Islamic idioms has been called a lightness of provisions. A Viet Cong fighter could sustain himself for days in his shelter with a handful of rice and continue his battle against the enemy. Which leader, religious or political, living in luxury and comfort has brought about drastic upheavals in world history? Which monarch who, having founded a dynasty, transferred power from another family to his own, has been a lover of luxuries and comforts? Ali ibn Abi Talib was the most free of all the world's free men. He was a free man in the complete sense of the word because he was a Zahid in the most profound sense of the word. Ali in Najh al-Balagha lays great emphasis on renunciation of worldly pleasures and comforts as a means of liberation. In one of the Hikam aphorisms, he says the following: "A greed is everlasting slavery." Mary, in one of his sermons, he describes the Zuhd of Jesus, the son of Claire, in these words: "He was free of any abasing greed." In another place he says the following: "The world is a place of transit, not a place of abode. Its people fall into two categories," says, "those who sell away their souls into slavery and those who ransom their souls and liberate them." In a letter to Uthman ibn Hanif, Ali, it is more explicit than elsewhere. Towards the end of the letter, addressing the world and its pleasures, he reveals to us the philosophy of Zuhd and the secrets of renunciation thus: "O world, get away from me! I have thrown your reins on your shoulders, have freed myself from your claws, and released myself from your snares. Go, get away! By Allah, I shall not surrender to you so that you should abase me. I shall not follow you tractably so that you may control me and lead me wherever you please." Yes, Ali's Zuhd is a rebellion against abasement and indignity on account of life's pleasures. It is a rebellion against human weaknesses and impotence before the tyranny of desires. It is a defiance of servitude to the world and obsequiousness before its charms. Zuhd and spirituality, Zuhd, love and worship. Another funny head of Zuhd and renunciation of hedonism is the aspiration to avail of spiritual bounties. Presently, we do not intend to undertake any argument to the effect that man and the universe possess an undeniable spiritual aspect. This is another story all by itself. It is evident that from a materialistic outlook of the world, the rejection of hedonism, materialism and love for money and wealth as a prerequisite for acquisition of spiritual virtues is devoid of any meaning. We have here nothing to say about the followers of materialism as a school of thought. At present, we address only those who have experienced the aroma of spirituality. This is so because anyone who has smelled its fragrance knows that as long as one does not liberate himself from the bondage of desire, as long as the infant soul is not weaned away from the breasts of nature, and as long as the material aspects of life are seen as not being the ultimate end of life and are seen, instead, only as means, the domain of the heart is not ready for the emergence of chaste emotions, majestic thoughts and angelic feelings. That is why it is said that Zuhd is the essential condition for exuberance of gnosis and is inalienably linked to it. The worship of Allah in its real sense, that is, the ardor of love, the zeal of devotion and service in the way of Allah, His constant presence in thoughts and His remembrance, the sense of delight and ecstasy in His adoration and worship, is not at all compatible with self-adoration, hedonist attitude, and being captured by the glamour and charm of material things. The need of Zuhd is not characteristic solely of the worship of Allah. Rather, every kind of love and adoration, whether it pertains to one's country, creed, conviction, or something else, calls for some kind of Zuhd and indifference towards the material aspects of life. It is characteristic of love and adoration, as opposed to knowledge, science or philosophy, that they have to deal with the heart, and as such, they do not tolerate any rivals. Nothing prevents a scientist or a philosopher who is enslaved to money and wealth from devoting and concentrating his intellectual powers, when necessary, on the study of the problems of philosophy, logic, physics, or mathematics. But it is not possible at the same time that his heart should be full to the brim with love, especially love of a spiritual nature, such as love for humanity, for his religion or creed. Certainly, it cannot burn with the light of the divine love, nor can it receive an enlightenment or inspiration of the divine sort. Consequently, the essential condition for receiving the spiritual grace and the realization of true humanitarianism is the purging of the temple of the heart from every trace of materialistic attachments, the extermination from the Kaaba of the heart of all the idols of gold and silver and of their destruction. As we have said before, we should not be led to misinterpret freedom from the bondage of gold and silver and the indifference towards what these metals can be exchanged for as monastic asceticism, which is an attempt to evade responsibility and commitment. Instead, it is only in the light of such zuhd that responsibility and commitment reacquire their real significance and are no longer empty words without content and but hollow claims. The personality of Ali as I is a glorious example. In him zuhd and commitment were combined together. While he was a zahid who had renounced the world, he, at the same time, had a heart that was most sensitive to the demands of social responsibility. On the one hand, he used to say, "What has Ali to do with perishable niceties and short-lived pleasures?" On the other hand, a small injustice or the sight of someone in distress was enough to snatch sleep from his eyes for nights. He was ready to go to bed with an empty stomach, lest someone in his dominion should remain hungry. Shall I stuff my belly with delicious foods, while in Hijaz and in Yamama there may be people who have no hope of getting a loaf of bread or a full meal? There was a direct relation between such zuhd of his and such sensitivity. Since Ali was a zahid, an unselfish man indifferent to the world, with a heart that overflowed with the exuberance of the love for Allah, he looked at the world, from the minutest particle to the greatest star, as a unit entrusted with responsibility and duty. This is why he was so sensitive towards the issues of social rights. Had he been a hedonist devoted to his own interests, he would never have been the responsible and committed person that he was. The Islamic traditions are eloquent with regard to this philosophy of Zuhd and Najh. Balagha lays particular emphasis upon it. In one particular hadith, it is related from Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq that he said, "All hearts that harbor doubt or entertain shirk shall be inauthentic. That is why they adopted zuhd, so that such hearts may be emptied and be prepared for the hereafter." As can be seen from this tradition, every kind of hedonism and attachment to pleasures is considered as shirk and contrary to the worship of the one God, Allah. Rumi describes the zuhd of the Arif in these words. Zuhd means taking pains while sowing. Mystic knowledge effort is as care during its cultivation. The Arif is the soul of the law and the spirit of taqwa. Mystic knowledge is the fruit of the labors of zuhd. Abu Ali ibn Sina, in the 9th namat of his work al-Ishraq, which he devotes to the description of various stations of the mystics, Maqamat al-Arifine, differentiates between the zuhd of the Arif and that of the non-Arif. He writes the following: "The zahids who have no knowledge of the philosophy of zuhd make a certain deal in their imagination. They barter the goods of the world for the goods of the hereafter. They forego the enjoyments of the world so that they may enjoy the pleasures of the hereafter. In other words, they abstain here in order to indulge there. But an aware zahid, one who is acquainted with the philosophy of zuhd, practices it because of his unwillingness to engage his inner self with anything other than Allah. Such a man, out of his self-respect, regards anything other than Allah to be unworthy of attention of servitude." In another section of the same book, where he discusses spiritual discipline, Ibn Sina says the following: "This training has 3 ends in view. First, the removal of impediments from the path towards Allah. Second, the subjugation of the carnal self al-nafs al-amara to the contented self al-nafs al-mutma'inna. Third, the refinement of the inward eyes batin." Then he proceeds to mention the effective means of realizing these 3 ends. He tells us that true zuhd helps in achieving the first of these objectives, that is, the removal of impediments, the non-God, from the way.